Chittick is currently Distinguished Professor in the Department of Asian and Asian American Studies at Stony Brook University. He has authored and translated 30 books and more than 175 articles on Islamic thought, Sufism, Shiism, and Persian literature, including monumental works on Rumi and Ibn al-Arabi, and has written extensively on that school, Islamic philosophy and Islamic cosmology. He has also trained several generations of students, myself included, and he is still active, mashallah, in both teaching and scholarship. His more recent books include The Repose of the Spirits, a Sufi commentary on the divine names and divine love, Islamic literature, and the path to God. And what he will be presenting today, I believe, is from one of the many projects that he is still working on. So please join me in welcoming Professor William C. Chittick.
Thank you for that welcome, and for all of you who've been, thank you to all of you who've been involved in organizing this conference. It's so good to see many of my old friends here. It's not only COVID which has kept us apart, but we kind of, for the past few years, we kind of stay home and avoid conferences and that sort of thing. So is that all right? Yeah. So let me just, well, let me go through this as quickly as I can, and so we can get to questions, discussion. So for much of the Islamic intellectual tradition, I mean, of course, the philosophers and the Sufi teachers, the only proper object of desire is the true beloved, which is God. These teachers also made clear that in actual fact, it is impossible to love anything other than God. So desire for other things stems from human ignorance and forgetfulness. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, explains this in his treatise on love. And Sufi teachers like Ibn Arabi and Rumi often discussed it. Now, one of the great scholars who wrote about the reality of love and desire was Sa'id ibn Ahmad Farghani. He was from present-day Uzbekistan and was one of the most influential students of Ghunavi, who is, of course, Ibn Arabi's stepson and his most important interpreter. Farghani expounded on the reality of love in both his Persian and his Arabic commentaries on a 760-verse qasida known as Nazm al-Suluk, the poem of the way, written by the great Egyptian poet Ibn al-Farid. And of course, Farghani was only one generation after Ibn al-Farid. So he was teaching in Cairo, and he would have known, with only one intermediary, people who knew Ibn al-Farid. So this transmission, right? Now, I've been studying and translating the 800-page Arabic text of Farghani's commentary for the past few years, and I'm now inclined to think that Jami was not exaggerating much when he said, no one has clarified the issues of the knowledge of the reality, ilm haqiqat, as precisely and interconnectedly as Farghani explained them in the prologue to his commentary on Qasida Tayyir of Ibn al-Farid and this Qasida. In this Arabic prologue, Farghani provides, which is about 150 pages long, an explication of Islamic metaphysics, theology, cosmology, spiritual psychology, and the path to God that integrates these discussions into a single narrative. And I don't know of anyone else who does that. Now, as Farghani makes clear, Ibn al-Farid's goal in his Qasida was to describe the stages of human perfection as they were realized by the Prophet Muhammad. Although the poem begins as a first-person account of the poet's enrapture with the divine beloved, the voice eventually changes to that of Muhammad himself, who explains the stages of wayfaring, suluk, that is, following him on the ladder to God. In both of the commentaries, Farghani often mentions the expression Wahdat al-Wujud. He seems to be the first author to use it in any kind of technical sense. You hardly find it before him. As for the expression of the four journeys, the other aspect of my paper, al-Arabi, it is well known in the later literature, which helps explains why the great philosopher Mullah Sadra used it in the title of his magnum opus. Farghani played an important role in making the expression, the four journeys, prominent. It was not used by Ibn Arabi, who says that there are three journeys and no more, without a fourth. In both the Persian and the Arabic text, Farghani often refers to four universal stages of the path to God, but he uses the expression four journeys only in the Arabic text, not in the Persian. This suggests that he formulated a clear notion of the four journeys while he was teaching in Cairo. His close friend and fellow student of Qunabi, Afifuddin Tilimsani, also mentioned four journeys in his books, but he did not go into detail. Now, by the time of Kashani, the Usus commented, a generation after Farghani, the expression four journeys seems to have been well established. What is noteworthy here about Farghani's discussion is that the four journeys provide the context for his understanding of Wahdat al-Wujud. Now, Farghani's prologue in the Qasida is structured as a standard cosmological scheme, namely that of the origin and the return, al-Mabda wal-Ma'ad. He depicts everything other than God as a circle composed of two arcs. As with many other authors, the two arcs, the descending arc and the ascending arc, he takes the reference to the verse about the prophet's Mi'raj. In the Quran, he was two arcs length away or close. I mean, you can translate it as two bows length, but a bow, qaus, in Arabic means both arc of a circle and a bow with which you shoot. Farghani devotes about 2/3 of the prologue to the stages of descent from the absolute essence by way of the divine names. The descending arc goes by way of three basic worlds of the cosmos after the names: the spirits, the images, the bodies. Then, once the descent reaches its lowest point, the arc of ascent begins with the four elements, followed by the appearance of minerals, plants, and animals. Only humans are able to ascend along the circle all the way back to the origin. Those among them who complete the journey are divided into several sorts, which include the friends of God, awliya, the prophets, the messengers, and the seal of the prophet. After describing various obstacles that people will encounter on the path to God, Farghani devotes the final section of the prologue to the stages of the journey. Here he follows the outline of the classic description of 100 way stations formulated by Ansari in the Nazal Sa'ini, a very famous book. Now, Farghani begins the prologue with the hadith of the hidden treasure. In theological language, the words I was a hidden treasure, kuntu designate God's essence. The divine names and attributes then express the relationships that are perceived between the non-manifest essence and its manifestations, which are the cosmos and everything. The fact that the essence is one existent reality is self-evident. As Farghani explains, however, this oneness, Wahdat, needs to be understood in two respects. The two are designated by the divine names al-Ahad and al-Wahid, both of which mean one. Al-Ahad designates God's transcendent, ineffable oneness, and al-Wahid designates his immanent, omnipresent oneness. In respect of the name Ahad, all designations are stripped away from the one essence. In respect of the name Wahid, all designations are affirmed for the one essence. Accordingly, I translate Ahad as the one only, and Wahid as the one all. Farghani is one of the earliest scholars, if not the first, to have paired the abstract nouns derived from these two words, that is Ahadiyya and Wahidiyya, the one onliness and the one allness. Both words designate the oneness of the real existence, but each in a different regard. This is my choice for ittiba, especially in this book. As for the word wujud, Farghani, like Ibn Arabi and many others, understood it in both its Quranic root meaning, which is to find and to perceive, and in the philosophical sense of existence and being. For Ibn Arabi and his followers, what the philosophers call the necessary existence is nothing other than the real existence, that which alone is truly real and truly found, always and forever. In this regard, wujud is identical with the essence. Hence, just as the essence in the one onlyness remains always in the essence and unknown, so also existence, as the philosophers often remark, has no whatness, no quiddity. So whether we call God the essence or existence, we cannot say what he is, only that he is. Now, the one real existence finds all things in itself, which is to say that God knows everything, as the Quran often puts it. The things, ashya, that God knows are often called fixed entities, ayan al-sabr. They are also called realities, quiddities, and tasks, the word that Dr. Brado said, shu'um. When God gives existence to a thing by saying be to it, only existence is actually found. But this existence is formed and entified by the fixed entity, which itself remains non-existent in God's knowledge. It follows that the one wujud, the one essence, is omnipresent, not as such, but as entified in accordance with the known things. As the Quran says, he is with you wherever you are. Now, Farghani points out that the two divine names, al-Zahir and al-Batin, the outward and the inward, or the manifest and the non-manifest, can be understood as denoting, respectively, the affirmative names and the stripping away names. Hence, the name outward correlates closely with the one allness of the essence. His outward existence embraces all. So this outward affirms that the roots of the multiplicity and diversity of things are found in the hidden treasure. The name inward is more closely related to the one onlyness, which affirms that the essence is which is designated as I was. When the divine names are affirmed, this is because their properties and traces are perceived as outward and manifest to us, whether in existence or in knowledge. Thus, the affirmative divine names assert similarity, Hashbi, wishes to say they acknowledge God in as much as he is immanent and knowable through his self-disclosures, Tetelio. The stripping away names are those that designate his non-manifestation and unknowability. So these names assert the essence's incomparability and conceit. Now, understood in regard of the one onlyness, the essence is seen as the necessary existence in which activeness is described. Two ways, active. Understood in the regard of the one allness, the essence embraces the manyness encompassed by the divine knowledge. God knows everything. Possibility and receptivity are ascribed to God in respect of the divine knowledge. For each known thing designates the possibility of outwardness, manifestation. Hence, the essence, I quote, has two essential attributes: oneness, which has activeness, and manyness, which has separateness. In his Persian commentary, but not in the Arabic, Farghani sometimes pairs these two regards of the essence by calling them the oneness of existence, Wahdat al-Wujud, and the manyness of knowledge, Kathrat al-Ilm. Farghani and many others commonly express the relationship between oneness and manyness using the words jam' and farq, gathering and dispersion. Ibn Arabi made these two terms cornerstone of his ontological vision. For example, he calls the name Allah al-Ism al-Jami', the all-gathering name, because it is the reference of all the other divine names. So its oneness gathers together their dispersion and distinction. So there are plenty of examples from Ibn Arabi and from other sources, but let me just keep to Farghani. In short, the term gathering, Yama, designates the harmonization of many and diversity by means of an all-embracing oneness. Dispersion then designates the multiplicity that is embraced by this gathering. In one long passage, Farghani describes the entire circle of existence as successive stages of gathering and dispersion. He writes that the one onlyness of the essence is a true gathering, but it is also a relative dispersion. For the regards of the one allness are implicit within the one onlyness. The one allness is then a dispersion of the one onlyness, but it is a gathering inasmuch as it brings together the infinite objects of God's knowledge. Various stages of successive dispersion and gathering result in the appearance of the three worlds, each of which is a dispersion relative to what preceded it and a gathering relative to what followed it. Once the descent of existence reaches the world of sense perception, inward gathering begins to make its appearance, despite the outward dispersion. Earth, at each successive level, minerals, plants, animals, displays gathering relative to the dispersion that preceded it. Human beings who were created in the form of the all-gathering name represent the highest stage of gathering in the cosmos. Note that the circle of existence is a dispersion that rises up from the initial gathering of all reality, which is called the one onlyness. When human beings reach the final end of their wayfaring on the ascending arc, they reach the perfection of their own all-gathering reality, created in God's form. Farghani explains that, in fact, human perfection has 4 ascending levels of gathering. The first and lowest level is achieved by those who attain the witnessing of Wahdat al-Wujud, which is a vision of the omnipresence of the name al-Zahir, the manifest. In other words, the vision of Wahdat al-Wujud is to actually see the face of God in all manifest reality. And recall that the name outward is precisely the name that embraces all the affirmative divine names, those that manifest tashbih, the assertion of similarity. The second level of perfection is to achieve the gathering, is to witness the manyness of knowledge by seeing God's name inward as it gathers together all manifest reality, which is designated by the stripping away names that assert God's importance. The third level of human perfection is to achieve the gathering of gathering, jam o jam. This is a witnessing that brings together the 2 previous gatherings, such that neither dominates over the other. The final level of human perfection is the realization of the one onlyness of gathering, ahadiyatul jam'. This is achieved only by the Prophet Muhammad and some of his select followers. It is the return to the one onlyness of the essence after having realized the previous 3 levels of gathering. Farghani often says that its specific characteristic is to witness that kullu shay'in fihi kullu shay'. That is, each thing is in each thing. Which is to say that it is to see that the entirety of reality is gathered together in each and every particle, in each and every particular thing. Now, throughout his commentary, Farghani makes clear that those who reach any of the levels of perfection do so on the basis of their wayfaring, suluk. And each of the 4 levels of perfection marks the end of a specific journey, safar. He explains these 4 journeys in a variety of contexts, throwing light on the terminology that is commonly used to describe the stages of the path. He provides a succinct description of the journeys in his commentary on verses 153. Let me read the verses. I mean, you know, for these people, this is the way you have to read love poetry. Just, first of all, you need the worldview, understand where these poets were standing, then you can appreciate what they're saying. The poetry was not written on the basis of reading books, it was written on the basis of realization. So, in these two verses, the lover, the poet, Ibn Farghani, is describing the culmination of his journey to the divine beloved. He says, the two of us are one person saying the prayer, prostrating with each prostration to his reality in gathering. Whose reality? One person saying the prayer. There's only one person saying the prayer. No one prayed to me apart from me, nor was my prayer to any other than me in performing each cycle. You can see why some of the jurists would be upset by that verse. Having explained the literal meaning of the verses, Farghani points out that the second verse marks the end of the poet's first. From here on, he tells us, the poet will be describing the three remaining journeys. Then he summarizes the journeys. He's a great teacher, Farghani. It's too bad he's too difficult. But he's really a great teacher. And that's why he really goes into detail. And he must have been, you know, teaching students who really didn't know much about theoretical Sufi, even though he was in Cairo, the Cairo of Ibn Farghani. Okay. So here's Farghani's explanation of no one prays to me apart from me. Here ends the mention of his journey from the soul to the real. By the property of love, for the sake of realizing the reality of the name outward and its universal root names, such as hearing and seeing. Now there remain for him two more journeys. One is from the spirit to the real by love's property, strength, and mastery. This is for the sake of realizing the reality of the name inward and the names specific to it. The second is from delimitation by one of these two names to the outward maybe this is third. The outward of the the next journey is from delimitation by one of these two names, the inward, the outward, to the outward of the godly presence, the divine presence, that gathers together the two by essence. So that's the third journey. That's Jam, the gathering of the gathering. Then there is another fourth journey, specific to the presence, our Prophet Muhammad. It is from the outward of the godly presence to its inward. Now, Farghani offers his most detailed explanation of the four journeys in a semi-independent chapter, about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the book. But it's far too long and technical for me to attempt any kind of analysis of it here. I want to look instead at how he deals with some very well-known terminology and integrates them into the whole notion of four journeys. Now, first let's deal with intoxication. Right? Intoxication is one of the best-known tropes of Sufi poetry, Arabic poetry, Persian poetry generally, but especially the Sufis. Not least because, as everyone knows, love intoxicates. Drunkenness plays an important role in Ibn Farid's Qasida, especially early on. In the very first verse of the Qasida, he says, my eyeballs hand toward me the firewater of love. My cup, her face, majestic beyond beauty. Then he says, I was freed for the need of my goblet by the pupil of my eye. I was drunk from her trace, not from my wine. So, in some of the passages in which Farghani explains the meaning of intoxication, he identifies it with another famous term, coloration, talween. The opposite of intoxication is sobriety, so. And the opposite of coloration is ableness, tamkeen, as I now translate it. The importance of coloration and ableness becomes clear in the prologue when he describes the way station following Ansari. According to Farghani, the first 80 way stations of the 100 that Ansari illuminates, the first 8 sections, pertain to the first journey. The first journey is the journey of loverness, being a lover, muhibbiyya. In other words, these are the stages over which the lover must pass in order to reach his beloved. And summing up the 7th division of the way stations, which is that of the stage, ahwal, we've heard a lot about stage, he mentions the oneness of existence for the first time in the book. These are love states that bring about the absence of the voyager's secret core, and make him transition from low particular presences, to the relatively elevated universal presences included in the name outward, whose property is to see the oneness of existence in the entity of the manyness that is outward in the soul, in its faculty, and in its organs. Now, the 8th division of the way station is called that of friendhood, walaya, the station of those who have become awliya, friends of God. Having explained 9 of the traits of friendhood, Farghani turns to the 10th, which is tamkeen, ableness. The 80th way station, according to Ansari. He explains that all of the previous way stations are varieties of coloration, talween, and that constantly changing colors are brought about by the ever-changing self-disclosures of the affirmative divine names, encompassed by the name outward. Ableness in this way station is then to realize the gathering that marks the end of the first journey. When the lover reaches it, he is no longer touched by any trace of, quote, the coloration of the self-disclosures of the names of the outward by the manifestation of one of the names, along with its properties and traces, when it dominates over another name. Now, each of the remaining 3 journeys also has an ableness that marks the point when gathering is achieved and the relevant dispersion has been overcome. Farghani explains that the lords of witnessing and self-disclosures, meaning those who have traveled the path to its furthest ends, have 4 sorts of coloration. One sort is connected to the level of the self-disclosures of the outward. It comes about by the successive arrival of the states gained from the properties of the names that are subsumed under the scope of the name out. Such as most of the affirmative names, such as creator, knower, and their like. The states of each name and the perception of the states of other names until the presence of this self-disclosures reaches the gatheringness of the name out. This is the station of its ableness. He gains ableness from the gathering of the properties of everything connected to this name outward, but this name's properties are veiled from the manifestation of the properties and states of the name inward. Now, in Farghani's reading, Ansari describes the second journey in the 9th division of wave state. That is the division of the realities. It is the journey of belovedness, mahjubiyya, and is alluded to in the famous hadith, which we've heard about, which Ibn Arabi, when I love my servant, I am his hearing with which he hears, his eyesight with which he sees. Ibn Arabi not only mentions this, as far as I was able to have been able to see, he mentions this hadith more than any other hadith. And also in every discussion, serious discussion of love, this is the key, because this hadith is the explicit expression of how the servant and the Lord are one. Anyway, the second sort of coloration, he says, is that which is connected to the name inward by the successive arrival of the properties of the names that are subsumed under its scope, like most of the stripping away names. The properties and states of each of these names veil the perception of the properties of the other names until the voyager reaches the station of its gatheringness and its ableness. That is, the gathering of the name inward. At this point, he gains the ableness to gather all the properties of the name inward. He is veiled by the states of the gathering of the inward from the states of the gathering of the outward. The third journey now corresponds to the 10th division of Ansari's way stage. Ansari calls it Nahayat, the ends. The first of these is recognition, ma'arifah, and the last, tawheed. In this third level of ableness, the voyager brings together both sorts of gatherings, so he is veiled neither by the traces of the name inward nor by the traces of the name outward. I quote, the third sort of coloration is that which is connected to the station of the gathering of gathering. It is connected to the appearance of the self-disclosures of the essence imbued with the property, neither of the name outward nor of the counterpart name inward. The possessor of this station gains the ableness to gather all the states that are under the scope of his station, namely those specific to the outward, to the inward, and to the gathering of the two, and to the self-disclosures of the essence that are imbued with their properties, the properties of these three. But he is veiled by the manifestation of properties not imbued with the property of the outward, the inward, or the gathering. The gathering. I try to start maybe it more quickly. The fourth, of course, he goes through, again, detailed explanation of why the Prophet state, the Prophet Muhammad is the only one who achieves what he explains the fourth journey in the same sort of detail. Now, annihilation and subsistence, we talked quite, that's come up several times, and and in the book, Farghani explains the four journeys in terms of these two terms, using these two terms. Ibn Farid himself speaks of annihilation in at least 9 verses and a subsistence in several more. Now, in one of these verses, Farghani takes the opportunity to explain that each of the four journeys brings about a specific sort of annihilation and subsistence. Now, in a dozen more verses, Ibn Farid uses annihilation's near synonym, obliteration. Now, in explaining one of these, Farghani says that there are 4 levels of obliteration, using the word interchangeably with annihilation. As in many other places in the text, she speaks of the divine names, outward and inward, in terms of existence, wujud. The outward of existence, Zahir al-Wujud, is in the essence, as manifest in all apparent reality. Well, the inward of existence, Batin al-Wujud, is God's self-knowledge, along with the infinite known things, his knowledge of the infinite known things, which are the fixed entities. So, first is the obliteration and annihilation of the manyness of the soul, along with its root and extraneous attributes, the final goal and result of which is attraction and subsistence through the subsistence of the unitary existence of the outward. What is witnessed in this state is the oneness of the outward existence, Wahdat al-Wujud al-Zahir, in the mirror of the manyness of the soulish attributes. Second is the obliteration and annihilation of the spirit and the attributes specific to it. The result of this obliteration and annihilation is the witnessing of the manyness of the realities in the mirror of the unitary knowledge, that is, which is the inward of the spirit. This is the witnessing of the manyness of the tasks of the inward of existence from behind the screen of knowledge and the known things and their distinctions, which they are not, while they are not disengaged from the robe of the loci of manifestation of the forms of their knownness. So third is the obliteration of delimitation by the property of these 2 witnessings, which are consequent upon the 2 preceding obliterations. The result of this third obliteration is the gathering of the 2 witnesses. I mean the witnessing of oneness in the entity of manyness and the witnessing of manyness in the entity of oneness. However, there subsists a trace of the property of difference between oneness and manyness, along with the distinctions and specificities fixed in that witnessing. And there also subsists in this witnessing a trace of oppositeness between some of the witnessed things and others. As for the fourth obliteration, with which the levels of obliteration are sealed, using that word, the seal of the prophet, it is the obliteration of the trace of delimitation by the property of the difference between manyness and oneness. Its result is to realize the oneness that gathers the 2 relations of oneness and manyness, and to see no difference between the 2, or rather, between all realities, or rather, between the essence and all relations, both altogether and oneness. Keep on going. Ascension, Mi'raj, been mentioned a number of times. I referred to it. This, of course, is the Mi'raj of the prophet, is the archetype of the path to God. No one goes back to God who's not walking in the prophet's footsteps, and he told us all about it in the hadith of the Mi'raj. Now, Ibn Faraz mentions it in verse 294, where he's speaking in Muhammad's voice. I passed beyond the limit of love, for love was like loathing. And my departure was from the goal of my unification's ascension. It's full of technical terms here. After explaining the poet's meaning, Farghani remarks that ascension has 4 universal levels. The first is from the nadir of the limitations of the manyness of the soul, its attributes of createdness, the properties of new arrival, and the limitations of description, to the zenith of the boundlessness of its oneness, of the oneness of the outward of existence. The final goal of this ascension is advancing to the presence of the gatheringness of all the names connected to the name outward. The limitation of that manyness and its incorporation into the entity of this oneness in the voyager's witnessing. It all goes back to the vision of the heart, of course. The second ascension is from the limitation of the spiritness and createdness to the boundlessness et loc of the inward of existence and the forms of the relations of its one allness, which are the realities of the known things. The elimination of the properties of the spirit's createdness and its incorporation into the realness of the knowledge that is connected to the known things. The final goal of this ascension is advancing to the presence of the gathering all the names connected to the name inward. Third ascension, which is the final goal of the ascensions relative to all the voyagers, apart from Muhammad, is advancing from the limitations of the manyness of the property of manifestation and non-manifestation to the boundlessness of the he-nesses gathering of the two, the essence. This is expressed as the station of two arcs length, right? Those two arcs, and the gathering of gathering. It gathers together all the forms of the relations of the one, allness, inasmuch as they are attributes in which the property of difference and opposition is fixed because of it. Now, as for the fourth ascension, Farghani explains that it is precisely the fourth journey that Ibn Farah is referring to in the verse discourse. So the possessor of the station of Orclus, Adna, which is the station higher than 2 arcs length, must depart from the station of 2 arcs length and from witnessing the relations within it as different attributes and go on to the station of or closer, Adna, from that same verse. Therein he will witness the relations that are the same as the essence. He will eliminate any trace of difference between them, between the relations, the attributes, and he will negate the property of oppositeness between the relation of love and the relation of loathing. This is why he said, and my departure was from the goal of my unification's ascension. Unification, I was aiming for that, then I passed. And again, the poet means in the state of the station of the gathering in 2 arcs length, I passed beyond the limit of love in a well-known understanding, in which its opposite is hate and loathing. Then, for me and in my witnessing, the relation of yes and the relation of hate became one thing, without opposition and difference between the two, because they were the same as the essence. Okay, let me go. There's a bunch more of these, but let me just summarize quickly. Get back to, I think it's sufficient to show that the Farghani's repeated mention of the term Wahdat al-Wujud in no way suggests that he was giving the term the special significance that it takes on in the later literature. When Jami, for example, included him among the Qa'ilun bi-Wahdat al-Wujud, those who speak for the oneness of existence, he did not do so because Farghani happened to have used the phrase, but rather because Jami considered him one of the great expositors of theoretical Sufism in the line of Ibn Arabi and Sadruddin Qurnabi, neither of whom used the term Wahdat al-Wujud. By the time of Jami, Wahdat al-Wujud had become an expression without any clear definition, serving as a marker for the position of certain well-known scholars. Some later authors, defended the expression, some criticized it, but rarely did they define exactly what they were talking about. So, to review what can be learned from Farghani's use of Wahdat al-Wujud, we can say that in his Arabic commentary, he consistently uses the expression to designate the vision of reality that marks the completion of the first of the four journeys that lead to God. And this first journey, the intoxication and coloration of the self-disclosures of the affirmative divine names have been annihilated, and the lover has reached sufficient sobriety and ableness through vision of the name of the outward. Now, one more passage can serve as a good example of his understanding of Wahdat al-Wujud. He is commentating on the verse, in her self-disclosure, she disclosed existence to my eye. So in everything seen, I will see her with my seeing. Farghani explains that the poet's heart has become a locus of disclosure for the presence of the beloved. Then, speaking in the voice of the poet, he writes, at that point, in this self-disclosure to my heart, that presence manifested to the gaze of my outward eye the entity of the all-merciful, unitary existence of the poet. For by the property of that self-disclosure manifest to my heart, that presence became the entity of my seeing, deposited in the outward of my gaze. My gaze looked in the entity of that self-disclosure of the existence of the outward, so it received this existence of the outward and saw its deployment as general and its diffusion as inclusive of everything my gaze perceived. My gaze saw my entity and my individuation as the same as a general, all-inclusive existence, while my individuation and the individuation, entification, and manyness of everything my gaze perceived were incorporated into and dominated over by the oneness of this one outward existence. It also appeared to me that this existence that was outward to my eye was the entity of the self-disclosure that was gained in my heart, for it had become my hearing, my seeing, my tongue, and my hand, such that I heard through him, I saw through him, I talked through him, and I see through him. Hence, in everything seen by my gaze, I witness my own entity and reality, which is the entity of the existence of the outward. With this witnessing, I witness the presence of my beloved, which is also the entity of existence. So, by seeing my soul in everything, I see the entity of that presence within it, for she is my entity without difference. And this is the meaning of his words. So in everything seen, I would see her with my seeing. Thank you.
Would you like to moderate your own questions?
Probably it would make it easier, wouldn't it? Instead of way, like, is that on there? Like that?
I think about that famous saying, "Uridu Allah, Rabbi Zaid, I desire not to desire. Did you come across in this translation a treatment by Farghani of that specifically?
No.
Or would you hazard a guess about where would he place that within these four journeys? Would that be the first one?
I wouldn't hazard a guess. And the whole thing listen, these classifications and divisions and systematizations are taking place in the wake of Ibn Arabi, who's just an ocean of dispersion. At least it looks that way. In fact, it's the ocean of oneness, but the dispersion seems infinite for readers. So, you've delved into the Futuhat. It's an incredible book. So try to make sense of the Futuhat, what he's talking about, right? No, so Bunabi, of course, is the first person, the stealth son of Ibn Arabi, who does systematize to a certain degree. And of course, he was reading Avicenna. He debated with Tusi about the meaning of Ibn Sina's philosophy, right? So Bunabi was a great philosopher as well as a visionary Sufi. But he's one of the most difficult authors in any language, well, in Arabic. One of his extraordinarily difficult. If you want to get a better sense of what Bunabi is talking about, well, the Persian commentary of Farghani are the lecture notes of Bunabi, who lectured on the poem of the way in Persian to his students, and Farghani was able to bring it all together into one text, and Bunabi put a stamp of approval on it. But then when he went to Cairo, he rewrote the whole thing. So it's not by any means a translation, much longer. And it's now he's really been struggling with these ideas, systematizing, making them clear, giving an organization. There's some of that in Bunabi and very little of that in the Futuhat and Ibn Arabi's writings. So there's a process going on here. And then a later generation like Kashani with his Fusus commentary, like Qaysari with his Fusus commentary, they're also philosophizing more. They're making it more systematic. They're making it possible for a student in the madrasa, having gone through, can now look at the Fusus, right, with get a clear idea of what's going on there. Farghani is certainly being read. He's the basis for most of the later commentaries on Ibn Farid because, it was a very, very famous poem. And then, of course, there are other Tilimsani, his fellow student of Bunabi, a very important author. Yusuf Kayswood, fortunately, working on him. Jandi, the Fusus commentary, another student of Bunabi, who's written this enormous commentary on the Fusus, which is every bit as difficult as Farghani. And someone has to spend half of their life working on Jandi. But you really have to be dedicated. Yeah, that fire has to take over. Someone was talking about that. Yeah. Anyway, so no, I mean, someone could, conceivably say, but I mean, even if you ask that question of Ansari, the great theoretician of the Suluk, right, of the Manazil Society and the 100 way stations that you have to go through. Do you think Ansari would give a clear answer to that? I mean, Bayezid was such a great figure. Ibn al-Arabi makes him one of the Mohammedis, right? The ones who have achieved the station of no station. He only mentions a handful of names who achieved maqam, la maqam. One of them is Bayezid. So I wouldn't dare to try to classify Bayezid. Yeah, here.
I would like to know about coloration and if you think the distinction between loan and sibla matters. I don't know much about Farghani, but I'm interested to know why he's using loan and not sibra.
Yeah, it's because of a long tradition. There's nothing new about this. I mean, in the Quran, Sibqatullah, of course, is an important expression. But even there, the commentators, some of them say that's Sibqa has more the sense of dye, I think. He uses the word in Sibaq in particular, right? From Sibqa. Sibqa means color. It's another common word for color. And I was originally translating in Sibaq and Sibqa, because he does use it, but not in this context, as the color, but I realized I have to distinguish between loan and Sibqa. Then I realized that the dye works nice because Sibqa is a dye. And insibaq means to be imbued with. That way we can, but they're not used in the same context at all. Now, why does he use that particular word? First of all, Ibn Arabi has discussed talween and tamkeen, the pairing, extensively in the Futuhat. I talk about them in the Sufi Path of Knowledge, but I translate them there as stability and variegation. That's kind of more modern Arabic understanding. When I'm looking at Farghani and the way he's explaining it, I'm saying, no, that's too far from what these words mean. And it goes back to Ansari, who gives that's the 80th way station. It's called Tamkeen, this ableness, and it's always, those two terms are just used as opposites or complements. So it's a standard terminology. But yeah, he couldn't have used anyway. Yeah, please.
I think you don't have to get credit for your talk. So my question is about like the role that a lot of these commentaries played, and not just commentaries on Ibn Arabi in particular, but other commentaries on other figures within Ibn Arabi's tradition, like Mahmud Shabistri. Like a lot of these commentaries, like you say, they themselves can be very difficult to read and to understand. So but would you say they are exclusively being used in these pedagogical purposes? And if so, is it pedagogical mainly for Sufis, or is it to like do outreach so that other people can read these? So like in madrasas. So how do you see them being used?
First of all, I don't like using the word Sufi because it suggests there's a difference between a Sufi and, let's say, an alim, a scholar of the religion. That distinction is rather phony. And if you go back to what we're dealing with is Ibn Arabi, who's he writing for? He's not writing for Sufis. He hardly mentions that word in the Futuhat, his huge book. And when he does, he says this is a designation for at-takhalluq bi-akhlaq Allah. It is becoming characterized with the character traits of God, right? That's what they're talking about, the Sufis. Who's he talking to, Ibn Arabi? I mean, you contrast him with Rumi. It's so obvious. Rumi is talking to the man in the street. Anyone who knows a native speaker of Persian can understand most of Rumi, even today. Right? Ibn Arabi, forget about it. He is so difficult. Who's he talking to? Not Sufis. As the term was known then, you can see it in some of the slightly earlier literature. The Sufis were known as kind of rambunctious types who didn't really do the necessary study, right? Shams Tabrizi, right? And I love this passage in the Ma'alat, where Shams says, I used to hang around with the Sufis, the dervishes. Of course, he sees the word dervish, not Sufi. I used to hang around with the dervishes, but I gave that up. Now I hang around with the fuqaha, the jurists. And the reason is the dervishes sit around and brag about being dervishes. The fuqaha, the jurists, they work. They study text. So I like them much better than the dervishes. I think this is a profound observation. A lot of what goes under the name Sufism was kind of put off to the fringe. Whereas the study of Irfan Ma'arifah, not Irfan because that's a later word, but used in the general sense, developing Ma'arifah within yourself, finding self-recognition, man arafah, nafsahu faqad arafa, rabbahu, right? The basic theme of Sufism, whoever recognizes his own self will recognize his Lord. This is, so it's very clear for an awful lot of people, intellectual types, of course, they're not just people who just following the rules, that it's a matter of self-discovery. Now, the philosophers were doing that. The advanced jurists, they went, there's jurisprudence after all, sort of beginning level stuff. Unless you went into usul of the philosophy, now that was much more sophisticated. But in general, as Ghazali said, the only necessary part of jurisprudence is enough so you can observe personally the law, the Sharia. That's all you need to know. The rest will leave to the jurists. They love this stuff. So, who's Ibn Arabi writing for? He's writing for the intellectuals, people who study philosophy, people who study kalam, people who study usul al-fiqh. He talks a lot about usul al-fiqh. People who want to know the meaning of the ahkam of the Sharia. The longest chapter in the Futuhat is about salat, the everyday prayer, in which he goes into tremendous detail, explaining every single act of the salat and its i'tibar, the regard in which it points to the real, and explains that some of the fuqaha say this, and some of the fuqaha say, in each case, he gives a different i'tibar, a different regard in which that act manifests the tajalli, the self-disclosure of the real. Who's he writing this for? Anyone else wants to know a little bit more about why he's doing these things? What is the point of doing the prayer? Well, you read Ibn Arabi, it's way beyond anything I ever imagined. So Ibn Arabi is writing for the elite of the elite. And start classifying as Sufis is very misleading, because Sufism has this questionable status. It's used in a variety of ways, and certainly it's not a term that Ibn Arabi would apply to himself. If Farghani, his student, his primary student, his stepson, when he talks about what they're doing, these people whom Jami calls them, those who uphold Wahdat al-Wujud, he says what we're doing is tahqiq. So he calls Ibn Arabi mashrab al-tahqiq. The mashrab, of course, is drinking place, literally. The school of verification, realization. Realization is to find the real in yourself. Then arafa nafsa, we're back to recognition, to recognize the real in yourself. To actualize the hadith of the hidden treasure, which says, I created the creatures so that I would be recognized. Right? Now, ma'rifa, I think it's important you always remember that the creative side of things is talked of in terms of ma'rifa in this hadith. I created the creatures so that I would be recognized. And then the returning side is also talked about as ma'rifa. This is now the process of actualizing God's goal in the hadith of the hidden treasure. I created the creatures so they would recognize me. All right. The return to God, the ascent, is the process of self-recognition and Lord recognition. The two go hand in hand. You cannot recognize yourself without recognizing your Lord, and vice versa. Let me take a sip of water here, and then I will be happy.
Professor Chittick, would you, I have a relatively straightforward, simple question. Could you elaborate on the difference between the divine name al-Ahad and the divine name al-Wahid? I like the way you translated Ahadiyya as one onlyness and Wahidiyya as one allness. And a second part to that question is whether you could elaborate a little bit about the fourth level of realization, which for Farghani is ahadiyatul jam, where you see each thing in every other thing. It reminds me of the jewel net of Indra in Buddhism, where you have a net that's the net of existence, and you have on each intersection a jewel, where each jewel reflects every other jewel. And it seems like this is equivalent to the fourth level of realization. Not talking.
Yes, there's
Farghani's
an interesting parallel. I mentioned that net of Indra in one of my books, talking the general significance of something. Ahad and Wahid. Now, these, if you read the books of the Kalam books, and also the books by those people who analyze the grammar and the language, lexicographers, some of them say Ahad and Wahid, they come from the same root. Wahada, even Ahad, although it's an alif instead of a waw, they mean the same thing. Others say, no, they don't mean the same thing. God doesn't use those two words, meaning exactly the same thing. So what's the difference? And you see, before Farghani, certainly, not so clear in Ibn Arabi, but I've run across it in books on the divine names, that Ahad is exclusive to God, and it refers to the essence, whereas Wahid refers rather to the all-embracing oneness of the divine essence. Ibn Arabi has, it's interesting, he does not use Wahidiyah, right? So Ahadiyah, he uses it all the time, Ibn Arabi. I have translated before this always as unity, but now that I'm looking carefully at Farghani and the way he's interpreting things, I can see that in Ibn Arabi also, Ahadiyya, very often one onlyness does a better job of getting across this uniqueness of the divine essence, right? So, Farghani is very explicit, by the way. He in his introduction, his prologue to the book, he goes in quite a bit of detail explaining the difference between these names. In the introduction, he defines and describes, and really in a very, very dense technical way, about 115 names of God. And their various meanings, right? So it's not just, and Ahad and Wahid are right there in the beginning when he talks about names that can be taken as designated essence per se. And then he says the Wahda is not an attribute of God, oneness, it is God. This is just the essence. But the essence, this Wahda, must be understood in two ways. One is referred to as Ahad, the other is referred to as Wahid, and then he explains. I give you a brief version of how he explains the difference between these two. So Ahad asserts God's, to use Ibn Arabi's terminology, his utter incomparability, tanzih. Wahid asserts that God is the all-embracing reality. He's one, but is a oneness that includes everything. Very often they talk about, Ahad, typically in later literature especially, is always the essence, whereas Wahid sometimes is comparable to the name, the numbers. Ahad doesn't designate a number, but Wahid doesn't, you could understand it as a number. And what it means is that God is one, and he's 1/2 of 2, and he's 1/3 of 3, and he's 1/4 of 4, ad infinitum. So in other words, all numbers stem from in that image, right? So this is not an uncommon way to try to get across the notion of this all-embracingness of Wahid, sorry. And then one onlyness. I was struggling for years, really. I mean, this text is 800 pages, single-spaced in English, the translation, right? We're talking about a huge thing. And then I've gone through it 4 times. I mean, I'm on the 4th stress, time for the 5th. It's an amazingly complex and fascinating work. And of course, I've been changing my mind a lot as I go along how to translate words, and among them Ahadiyya and Wahidiyya. Unfortunately, I'm consistent, so it's not too difficult with a computer to do the search and replace. Anyway, I'm going off target. Any other questions here? Yeah, please. Yeah, there's someone new. Yes.
Thank you so much for this. My question is, yeah, so the question is, what is the difference between the debate of the essence and the existence in philosophy and the essence and existence in Sufism? I mean, if we can look at it from, let's say, Avicenna and Ibn Arabi, can you have a few words, please?
I really don't like to get into these debates because I consider them, each of them, a different etibar, a different regard, a different way of looking at them. I mean, if you go back, look at this term, Wahdat al-Wujud. People talk as if, oh, Ibn Arabi invented the school of Wahdat al-Wujud, as if there's no one talking about Wahdat al-Wujud before him. Tell me, how many wajib al-wujuds, necessary existences, are there for Avicenna? I mean, it was self-evident to all the Muslim philosophers that wujud, the real wujud, the necessary wujud, is one. There's no two-ness involved. Then the big question is, La yasru min al-wahid illa wahid, as the Avicenna sometimes says. Nothing emerges from the one except the one. So how do you relate the one, which is this wajib al-wujud, to the many? How does the many fit in there? And then there are all sorts of debates, discussions of exactly, very logical, apodictic way, offering various proofs. Ibn Arabi will, he doesn't bother going through these proofs. He takes it as self-evident, the reality of the real, and opens us up, of course, to many different perspectives on seeing things. The whole Futuhat is just a chapter by chapter, he switches the itibar and explains things from this point of view, from that point. Along the way, he discusses all of the Quran, basically all the significant terminology, standpoints of the philosophers. He accepts them all and rejects them all, put it because he stands in the station of no station. The station of no station is where you affirm all of the reality, well, rejecting that any exposition or any explanation is sufficient. One must go into, and again, some hayra, bewilderment, he calls it. This highest state of knowledge, well, some passages, it's totally mind-boggling to put it into current English, right? There's no way you can understand what's going on. So you deal with it, well, Sage Rashid, but this kind of, I really don't like those, very technical back and forth between philosophers, and usually, of course, they're always straw men, if you know what I mean. In other words, the guy who's making the argument against doesn't give the other side a chance to talk, quotes Ibn Arabi out of context, quotes Avicenna out of context, and then says, well, they're holding this, whereas it's much more interesting to read those texts and to imbibe them and absorb them, and then move on to some other texts. I mean, this is the way. Unfortunately, most of us, we don't have that transmission anymore that you were talking about, right? We need those books. It's the only way we can get it in a society like our own. And hopefully along the way, we'll find someone who's also, got it inside. But simply by exposing yourself to the text of these great scholars, you're opening little doors, and hopefully they'll become, what the Futuhat is all about, the title where it's coming from, the openings, right? What does Ibn Arabi says? You can't, right? I was knocking at the door. And then one day God opened it. He says, you cannot open the door. It's impossible. You can knock. Knock at the door. How do you knock? Follow in the footsteps of Muhammad. Let me take this one. Tarjuman al-Ashraf has come up a number of times. And especially that verse, my heart is temple for all forms and this sort of thing. But I remind you that when he says, I follow a deen of Muhammad, I follow the religion of love, many people have sort of jumped to conclusions on that, oh, look at this wonderful, all-embracing. Read his commentary, please. He makes very clear that the religion of love is the religion that is referred to in the Quran, when the Quran says to Muhammad, well, in tuhibbun Allah, fattabi'uni yuhibbukum. If you love God, Muhammad is told to say, if you love God, follow me, then God will love you. So that is the religion of love, following Muhammad. And that is the station of no station. And that is a religion that has room for the idol temples and room for the Torah. But it's not, it's not as some people imagine, this kind of wishy-washy love of all things, that is rather popular these days. Yes, please.
So you've been a witness to and an active participant in the unfolding of Ibn Arabi's teachings in the West over many decades. From where you stand now, do you have a sense or any pointers for us on what is important for us to pay attention to, or what may unfold in the years to come?
Well, years to come, I have no idea. Oh. I think the most important thing, of course, is just to become familiar with his writings. The translations are exceedingly important. And the translations, of course, should be good translations. And like every other author of note, there are bad translations floating around. So you have to also learn discernment to tell the good from the bad. It would help if you learned Arabic a little bit. And of course, it will take you 10 years before you can read Ibn Arabi in Arabic, if you've got good teachers then. Otherwise, forget it. So I don't know what to tell people. I think generally, if you're finding benefit from reading Ibn Arabi, for living your life, or for understanding the way that things are, or for keep it up. But I can't give you anything more specific than that. He is talking to your preparedness, your capacity. And none of us has his capacity. Don't fool yourself there. You can benefit from studying him. But it's a big mistake to think that because you read 2 books on Ibn Arabi, now you know all about Wahdat al-Wujud and the unity of being and that's it. I don't think there's anything that really gives, briefly, what Ibn Arabi is talking about. You need to do some more thorough research. I've done my best over the years, actually. Starting with the Sufi path of knowledge, when I was, I studied with Izutsu, great scholar. I read Quran stuff, and I realized these 2 guys are, both of them have gone. They're wonderful, but they don't put it together. And also, remember, those scholars never read the Futuhat. They might have known something about it, but they weren't working from the Futuhat. They were working from the Fusus and the tradition of Fusus commentary. It's obvious. With Izutsu, it's the Fusus and Karshani, who's a third generation commentator. Right? Karshani is already rather far in the direction of codifying Ibn Arabi. So what I wanted to do in that book is to go back to the Futuhat and find, the overarching themes, which will allow anyone with the thirst to do it, to understand broadly what Ibn Arabi is doing, what he's trying to say, and maybe suggest some roads which you can follow up on how to truly appreciate it. But you'll never get there without study, very serious study. It's not going to work. I mean, for some Sufi orders, maybe you could go and do some dancing and this sort of stuff and some zikr and, sure, that's fine. If that fulfills you, go ahead. But Ibn Arabi is not that sort. As I just said, I mean, even Rumi, who is definitely speaking to everyone, even Rumi, most people have got it completely wrong, the popular translators in particular. And Rumi is so straightforward in Persian. You put him next to Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi, you start scratching your head. Whereas Rumi is just plain straightforward. Anyway, a lot of Sufism in practice these days is, much more akin to Rumi because it's poetical and it's beautiful and music and all this sort of stuff, and you don't have to do anything. Like chanting easy. He's not sitting among these dervishes because they all. I prefer talking to the dervish. Is time up? Or what do we have?
You closed the audio, but it's okay.
Oh, I closed the audio?
Yeah, it's okay. I can.
You took care of it? How did I do that?
That was the audio, but it's okay.
This?
But we are at time. If you want to take one more question, maybe.
Okay, as you like. I mean, so, I have to do it, huh? Why don't you? Ali, you take the choice. You make the choice.
If I remember correctly, in the Sufi Path of Knowledge, you mentioned that you were going to do your treatment in 3 volumes.
Right.
I'm wondering if the 3rd volume ever happened.
Yes, right. People, every once in a while, I get an email from saying, "Hey, Chittick, what happened to the 3rd volume?" The way you end up doing something has an awful lot to do with outside forces. That is, I don't get to choose really. I applied at least twice for, grants in order to do that volume, and both times I was turned down. I didn't get the grant. Now I take that as an ishara, an illusion that okay, do something else. And so I've been doing other things and waiting for the ishara to come. Now get back to that 3rd volume. It hasn't come. In the meantime, Farghani is amazing. Farghani will give you the details of Ibn Arabi's cosmology. I mean, not the way that I would have done it, but in a very systematic way that Ibn Arabi never does. And so I would suggest to you, if you really are interested in the 3rd volume, well, read Farghani as soon as it comes out. But if, and I can't make any promises on that either because it's really a huge project. And although I'm well advanced, getting a book actually into print is a huge thing, especially when you're dealing with a 200-page book. It's not enough. 800 pages? Who's going to publish that? So, no, I'm sorry, I haven't. Well, I'll take an advisement, but there are still people out there who would like me to do the 3rd volume. Yes.
Yeah, so please join me in thanking her and finish.